Before this week's episode, here is an important announcement. What I would like to do at this point is I want to. There's a compilation of bits and pieces. I did some stuff a long time ago. You may have seen it. It's on the channel. It's called The Mother of All Knockdowns, Volume 1. I think I was planning on Volume... Did I do a Volume 2? Maybe I did a Volume 2. However, we're going to have a look at some of that. Not all of it, but some of it. And I'm going to talk you through some bits and pieces, just so you have a flavour of what's going on prior to this week's episode. Okay, so let's have a look at this, and then we'll go back to the episode afterwards. Bye. So here's a couple of good examples of knockdowns. This one, up, over the side. Plenty of padding he's wearing there. This one, very different kettle of fish. This is Melissa McCarthy. Well, it's Lucy Romberg. It's her stunt double, giving it the beans. That was probably nearer 30 miles an hour. This one, again, little bounce at the start just to get him up. Again, little bounce, look, just to jump up, get onto the bonnet. This is Tammy Baird. We'll catch up with her later. Look at the leg, leaning the leg up, and again, you'll see that later on. That's from another angle. Again, that little jump is just enough to get you up onto the bonnet. These are standard ones here, look. This is weird. Look, arriving, walking, then turning directly in front of the car, then going up on the right shoulder and spinning over on the right shoulder. Fascinating. Little jump, plenty of timing, up, bang. This one, look at this. This is a bicycle going the full length. I've only put that in because I don't really like bicycle cyclists. This one, Grant Page, that one, going the full length. And this one, look, he's on pegs on the motorcycle because he's got to get up. Look at that. Oh, my goodness. That's pretty serious. Sammo Hung, giving you a couple of examples of what to do. Again, he's jumping up. He's running away in the next one. Then he jumps up and the car stops and he bails. This is Gary Connery going over the top of a SUV. Hello and welcome to this week's show, where we look at action on film and television. Now, we've covered a number of topics of late, and we're going to explore one today which is again referred to by many as relatively simple, and I assure you it isn't. I know we've covered a few bits and pieces already, and I know I say this every time, but this is an art form. Stunt work is an art form, and therefore you need to be incredibly talented and incredibly professional and, ironically, incredibly experienced to do the job you do. Whereas, I know we talked about some stunt schools now, but in the past, and this is a great example of that, you didn't get any practice, you know. So this week we are going to look at car knockdowns and how they will appear, evidently, to some individuals that, well, it's just being knocked down by a car. But there is an art form to it, there's a science to it, and then also there's a safety element to it which we'll play on later. Obviously there's a safety for the performer, but there's a safety for Joe Public as well, and I'll explain that later on. But we'll touch on that because there are some general road safety things that you can bear in mind that could be very useful here. So, being knocked down by a car. You've all seen it. You've seen it in films. You've seen it in television. Somebody walks out from behind a parked vehicle, doesn't see the oncoming car, and is busy, reading a newspaper, on the phone, texting, whatever they're doing. They don't see the problem as it comes, and then you get the close-up of them. They cut to the car, They cut to the pedestrian, they cut back to the car, they cut back to the pedestrian, who then looks and then goes, and then that's the moment where the impact happens and you see them rolling over the car and down the other side. So a couple of things. Firstly, you do pick up shots originally, so you establishing shots rather of the sequence. And often it's the car driving at speed past a stationary camera. That gives it that momentum, it gives it the speed, it gives the audience a chance to go, wow, that's travelling way faster than maybe it should be in that built-up area. He's doing more than 30, wouldn't you say? With that seed now sown, you see Joe Public walking down the road and seeing somebody on the other side of the street, hi, goes over, and then you're going, well, wait a minute, that car's travelling really fast. And he's not going to be able to see that they're going to hit each other. That's what you're looking for. Coupled with the editor, who's throwing in these cuts left, right, and centre to speed up the process. What the editor then has to do is to make you believe that the impact is happening at the same speed as the car arriving in the shot. We've established in those earlier shots that the car is doing 50 miles an hour, let's say. It's not feasible, really. It's been done, and you will see it in this compilation. But it has been done faster, but it's not feasible to do it that quickly. Car knockdowns, realistically, will be done anywhere between 10 and 20 miles per hour at an absolute push. And 9 times out of 10, that car's the fastest part of momentum is often, the car is maybe 15, 20 feet in front of the performer in certain cases. And the car, 3, 2, 1, action, vroom, drives into shot. But it hasn't driven from a long way away, it's driven from here. So that's, you get that, there's a speed thing going on. And the camera could even do that just enough to allow the car to pass through shot, giving it the impression that it's travelling much faster than it really was. So you take all of this into consideration. And there are things that you need to do as a stunt engineer. What the stunt engineer will do is they will take the car and they will often, with the coordinator, talk through the vehicle with the performer. What in the script does the knockdown say? What does it say is going to happen during the knockdown? If anything at all. Is the character going to go the full length of the car? That's the first question. If so, okay, then we need to work it out in such a way. Are they going to go part way up the car and then disappear over the wheel arch at the front? Are they going to get stuck in the windscreen? Is that the idea? Do they then get shot out the far side? Or, is there, what type of vehicle is it? Because that will be very dependent on the type of fall that then happens, the type of knockdown that happens. If it's a saloon car, okay, well, you can do all of those options. You can go the full length, you can go part way, you can touch and go, you can get knocked off, or a near miss, something like that, where there's just a moment of contact, possibly. Is it a small vehicle? Is it it's not a family saloon? Is it a very small car? Something considerably smaller. That means that the knockdown itself, you could still go full length, but it's an unusual one. And also, what height is the actor who is now being doubled by the stunt performer? If he's quite tall and you're being hit by a vehicle that's quite small, it's a juxtaposition. It's an unusual thing to look at. So that has to be taken into consideration too. Often, in connection with prepping the vehicle, 9 times out of 10, there may be a requirement to remove windscreen wipers. That may need to come off. You may not want to get clobbered by one of those. They're quite sharp in certain places, or they're taped in place. That may be a requirement. Don't take them off fully. They need to be seen in shot, but just maybe tape them down so they can't move anywhere, even if there is some sort of impact along the way. Sharp bits and pieces, that might need to be removed. Is there the type of vehicle that has a what's the thing I'm referring to? Like a Rolls Royce and the Silver Lady on the front. Do you know what I mean? A mascot. That was exactly the word. Thank you very much for that. Mascot. Is a logo, a mascot? Is that on the front? If so, all right. Can it be removed? Can it be replaced? Can it be replaced with something else? Is it possible to put a rubber equivalent in? Bear in mind travelling at speed, so up to 20 miles an hour. And there are two ways, really, to get a knockdown done. Firstly, is timing, which is certainly the one that majority, I suppose, of performers will want to use. They'll want to time it themselves. They'll want to run through where the vehicle is starting, where that impact point happens, and how are they going to approach it. A bit like a high jumper. You see the high jumpers, they have to work a particular start point. They have to work how many steps to get towards the point where they push off with one foot to then do the Dick Fosbury onto the mat. Similarly with long jumpers. I use athletics because it's that way of being able to distance. I've got to get from here to here in certain strides. Hurdlers, great example. 110 metres hurdles or 400 metre hurdlers. Was it 440 or one or the other? But ideally you want to have 12 or 13 strides between each hurdle. If it's 400 metres, I think it's 11, 12 or 13 strides between each. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ed Moses, who was the most extraordinary man over 400 metres hurdles, I think he did get it down at one point, and maybe on a world record attempt, to either 11 or 10.5 strides per gap between each hurdle. But you, as a performer, you then need to work out, right, here I am here, that's where the impact point is, how am I going to get there? We've discussed this before when we were talking about certain films and certain ways in which you dismount a horse, for instance. You do it because you have a natural bias. I write with my right hand. Now, this may not be everybody's thing, and I have, over time, I have sort of rejigged this a bit, but for me, I am right-handed, and I'm happiest diving to my left. And for those people watching it the other way around, I am right-handed, and I'm happiest diving to my left. And I don't know why, and I say diving, when I used to be school football and stuff like that, I was always in goal, and majority of the occasions I would go left. I think it got to the stage where a lot of the penalty takers were fully aware of this, and consequently would put it to my right and would win. I would go to my right, but not very often. So you do develop a natural bias over time. You can't afford to have a bias as a stunt performer because I suppose the requirements of the gag will mean that you'll need to go one way or the other. So how you are happiest getting up onto the bonnet of that vehicle. So you've got this way of being able to roll up onto the bonnet either on your left side or your right side, and you have to time that. It's a case of watching the vehicle come to you and then time your roll. Now, bear in mind, and again, we go back to the differences in the sexes, in the genders, because if you are a stunt man, you may be wearing a full uniform, you may be wearing a suit, you're likely to have a jacket, something of that nature. You can hide pads, and over time, a stunt man may be able to wear pads in a certain place that another performer wouldn't. You know, it's very specific as to your requirements. How are you best feeling with this? Which is better for you? Do you like to have a back pad on? Do you want knees and elbows, or what do you need? So all of that stuff can be taken into consideration as far as the uniform or the outfit is concerned. Stunt women, as we've touched on before, very different kettle of fish. Really, 9 times out of 10 likely to be in a skirt. Let's be perfectly honest about it. And so there is going to be more of a chance for an injury, a flesh wound, certainly a bruise, something like that. A man can take slightly more precautions. And I don't think that's going to change any time soon. So again, we did look at, you know, some of those small pads that just fit over the extremities, you know, the elbows, the knees. If they are wearing, if they are a policewoman, or they're you know, wearing a costume that allows pads to be used, then they're going to use them. Of course, they're going to use them. You know, they're going to do it. If it's not going to hinder them in any way, they're going to do it. Anything that will allow them to be able to have some sort of protection, then by all means. So you will also work out, presumably with the coordinator and the stunt driver. And it's not just Joe Public driving, it will be a stunt driver. And they will be, you will either know them, or the stunt coordinator will say, right, this guy, Joe's going to do the driving, and you're going to do the knockdown. And you work out between the two of you where you'd like to be, and then, you know, we can work out between us all where everything else fits in place. Does anything need to happen during that knockdown? Because, you know, the script may say that, well, he goes up onto the bonnet and onto the roof, but then he hangs onto the roof because the car then turns right out of shot and he has to be seen on top of the vehicle. So if that's the case, you can't go the length of the car and you can't come off early. You've got to get up onto that. You've got to get up onto the roof. And in certain cases, that's working out with the driver, because the driver may then, once you're up on the bonnet, hit the gas a bit more and be able to throw you back onto the roof. If, you know, momentum's a massive thing here, and it's a huge factor in a lot of these gags. But when you get up, this car's travelling at 20 miles an hour, let's say, and you're not travelling at 20 miles an hour, and that there's an impact zone, which is often the windscreen. It can go. You know, they're not reinforced. They can break because they're meant to. They're designed that way to shatter or often come through in one piece. You've seen the body shape of somebody. Somebody's had something thrown at the car. There's a indentation in the windscreen. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to keep those pieces together. Not always. If you hit it directly in the corner, for instance, it will shatter into a million pieces and fall out. But, you know, often it goes into a sort of like a catch net situation, and you could get stuck in it. Now, if it means that you have to get up onto the roof of the car because you have to hang on because you're going out of shot and the camera needs to see that the guy's up on the roof, then the driver will maybe just squeeze the gas a touch more and throw you up onto the roof, and then you can hang on as you get out of shot. So many of these things need to be taken into consideration. Another factor that was mentioned to me many, many moons ago, and I will show you the clip here as we talk through it, but for the television series Not the 9 O'Clock News in 1979, I want to say 1979, 1980, stuntman Nick Wilkinson was asked to do a gag on an episode which was coordinated by Gareth Milne. Gareth was driving the car, and the idea is that Nick walks up to the pedestrian crossing, a zebra crossing. Is it a zebra crossing? No, it's not. It's a pedestrian crossing. And the lights are on green. They then go to red, and then the crossing signal goes, and Nick sets off across the road, and this yellow car, and I think it's a Cortina from memory, and this car comes hurtling through the traffic lights and sends him up into the air and right over the far side of the car. And then the payoff gag, because it's a comedy show, and the payoff gag is to go back to the traffic lights where it then has the image of the green man being knocked down by a car. Belly laugh. Now, this was done on a number of occasions, and Nick chipped his shoulder actually quite badly on one of these, the first or second take maybe, when he went right over the top, never touched the car at all. And the way that, and I've always kind of assumed, and maybe this was from an earlier take, but I remember talking to Nick about this, and he said there was a take when he didn't take his hands out of his pockets at all, and he went right over the top with his hands in his pockets. Now, and again, if you're falling anywhere, you want to put your hands down to help you push off stuff and all that sort of bits and pieces. And there was a take when that didn't happen, he went right over the top. Gareth was driving. And I would say, when you look at the footage, that's 20-ish miles an hour. That's pretty swift, by all accounts, and he's gone right over the top. And there are other knockdowns where they're just arriving on the top of the bonnet and then getting thrown off one side, or there are all sorts of bits and pieces. I'm also going to show you a gag by a wonderful stuntman called Carl Cefalio. Carl Cefalio is a Hollywood stuntman, worked on hundreds of pictures, and as an actor, he's a very good actor as well. He's got one of those faces that walks into a shot and you go, oh, you're going to die then, mate, because you just know, is that immediate look on his face. But great character actor, good with lines, and I'm going to show you a knockdown of him. Jack Gill, I believe, is driving the car, and it'll be running as I'm explaining this to you, but I can't remember what show this was from. But he really does. The car is low down. It's a sporty vehicle. He gets low down on it. He tries to get up onto the bonnet. There's an impact, and he is sent up in the air. And the first port of contact when he hits the floor is his head. That's some do. It really is the most remarkable thing. You look at some of these knockdowns and go, wow. And you think for a moment, and again, slowed down. Slowed down, it looks poetic. There's an art form to it. It's a piece of art. Being knocked down by a car properly. And that's the difference. You and I can walk out to the street and get knocked down by a car, but to do it properly, so that, all right, you get knocked down by a car and then you get up and you go, do you know what I'll do? I'll just do this, and maybe if you just come in slightly less hot, and I'm going to go the other side this time, and maybe we'll try and get... That's properly, to do it again, and to keep doing it until either the director says, okay, I've got it, or until your body says, I'm done here, by the way, and you're getting no more. So if you can make up an edit based on all of those takes we've done already, super, but I don't want to go again because I can't do this anymore. Which is often where the director will go, well, just get me somebody else, and they'll get somebody else to do it for you. Give me the wig. Actually, somebody puts the wig on, and then you go and do it again. So, Clint Eastwood, man's got to know his limitations. A man has got to know his limitations. And if those limitations are being knocked down 7 or 8 times on a Wednesday lunchtime, and you then decide, we're not doing anything different here. That's the thing, probably, more than anything else. If there were a number of takes, and on a number of occasions you were asked to do something different, and each knockdown was different, then okay, and of course the editor can make up the balance of the rest in the edit, but that's not always the case. Often it's just a case of doing it again and again and again for the sake of having a number of takes. And you don't want to rock the boat, but you also want to point out to somebody, I'm only human here. and judging at the speed that car's coming in, and we've done one take already and you want 2 or 3 more, you'll get 2. I'll do another one, and then you might have to find somebody else to do this, because this is, we're not doing anything different. Do you know what I mean? So there are those conversations which may need to be had. And from that point of view, from safety anyway, and from a general safety point of view, if you should find yourself, God forbid, in a situation where you are crossing the road and you find yourself in the path of an oncoming vehicle. Now, bearing in mind that there are some speeds that you're just maybe not going to be able to do a lot with, but if you are in a position to jump up just a touch, and again, it's timing really, and I know it's a lot to think of when you've got your life flashing before you, but there is a moment where you might just be able to jump up onto the bonnet of that vehicle and maybe, just maybe, bury yourself in the windscreen. Worst case scenario, you get spat off, and that's possibly where the greater part of an injury, if it's going to happen, because you're not wearing padding, you're not prepared for anything, you may get spat off, you may hit the ground, you may hit another vehicle, you may be hit by another vehicle. So all of these things are taken into consideration, but there is a possibility that knowing, if you can, you find yourself, ideal situation, don't find yourself stranded in the middle of the road in oncoming traffic. However, should it happen, you may be able to buy yourself added time if you are able to maybe jump up onto the bonnet, which will prevent those initial impacts, which are likely to be knees or thighs or hips if you're hit by a vehicle. And having suffered a couple of broken hips myself, that's not great. It's not pleasant. It's extremely painful, and the process of being able to get to a point of fitness where you can do everyday things again is extremely long. We've all broken legs. We've all done similar sort of things. You know how difficult it can be. So if there is a possibility of getting up so that impact doesn't hit you in the side, hit you in the hips, hit you in the knees, it takes a long time to fix these things. So if there is a possibility of you able to do that, do it. I'm going to try and find a little bit of footage that fabulous American stunt woman called Tammy Baird put together. And she was doing a similar sort of exercise in connection with, worst case scenario. You find yourself in a situation and this is what happens. So take a look at this.
It's a nightmare that seems to be happening more and more. Pedestrians being hit by cars, trucks, and buses. Last week, this little guy was struck as he darted across the street in Brooklyn, New York. But look, he bounced right back. Same deal here. The youngster who was hit gets up and smiles and waves at the driver. Experts say there are lessons to be learned here, steps you can take to survive being mowed down by a moving vehicle if you can't get out of the way in time. Tammy Baird is a professional stunt woman. She says the reaction time must be a split second.
The most important thing is getting up on that hood because you don't want it to hit you and ricochet you down to the ground.
And here's how you do it.
Make sure you pick up the leg closest to that car so there's no weight on it, and it'll help swoop you up. Number one rule, I cannot stress that enough. No weight on the leg closest to the car.
You can see by pure instinct, this guy does exactly that and walks away.
When I go up, I'm on the car, I roll, and I like to keep my hands here so I protect the side of my head, because if not, it's going to hit that windshield.
Here's another scenario.
Sometimes you want to mad dash and run away, but the car's right behind you, so what are you going to do? You have to make sure that you can at least jump on it and then be able to push yourself off.
There's no question we've seen a rise in the number of auto versus pedestrian injuries for two main reasons. One is smartphones and people looking down and not paying attention to where they're going. The second is using headphones and not being able to hear something that is happening in their immediate vicinity.
Dr. Armand Dorian, an emergency room physician at County USC Medical Center in Los Angeles, stresses that even if you walk away from a collision, be warned.
If you're ever hit by an automobile, you should be seen by a physician. You will be surprised at the injuries that you feel like you may not have that actually do occur. Internal damage is very common. Don't let the adrenaline rush fool you into believing that you're not hurt.
So they're good examples, good advice. So based on what I was saying, and look at that imaging there, if you can get up onto the bonnet of that vehicle, you may be able to buy yourself vital time, which could save your life. I think that's very, very important. And I also think that should be taught in schools. I don't know whether that's something that anybody else has ever considered, but you know, I remember when I was a kid, there was a girl who lived just down the road from me. I believe her name was Louise. Just trying to think off the top of my head. I still see her father about, actually, when I go and see my dad. And a lovely girl. She was a little younger than me, but there was a number of us. We used to play together. And she was going to the shops one day. There was a zebra crossing in the village. Just around the corner on the main road, there was a zebra crossing. And she walked across it, and a car never stopped and went right through her and out the other side. And I don't believe stopped. Kept going. And she would have been 9, maybe 8 or 9. Now, the speed that obviously this vehicle was doing, and the fact, I mean, there wasn't much of her. I mean, she was a very slight character, very nice. I remember her as being a lovely girl, but would never have stood a chance, you know. And even in that situation, she wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. I imagine. But you know, we had television campaigns here in the UK. Got the Green Cross Code Man. I don't know whether this was translated into any other language. I don't know whether you guys in other countries languages, you know, but well, you know what I mean. I don't know whether in other countries around the world they had similar characters who would teach kids about road safety and about standing at the edge of the road and looking both ways, and not only looking both ways, but when you're crossing the road, you're looking and you're listening the entire time until you get to the other side. Because nowadays is very, very crucial, we've moved on a long time. We've moved on a long way from people who cross the road and they look and they listen. Or they cross the road at a zebra crossing, or they cross the road at traffic lights. Loads of people these days just don't bother. They wander out into traffic and they go, I'm going over there, and they walk in that direction. And yeah, the law says that these vehicles are not allowed to knock you down. But if you're going to be an arse about the whole thing and walk out into the street, and you know, the guy has to brake and then somebody else has to brake behind, and then they could swerve off and hit that car, and it's just stupidity. So what's people trying to cross the road, and 20 yards down the road is a zebra crossing or set of traffic lights? I've never understood it. It will never make any sense to me, and it happens on a daily basis. And also, the other thing to take into consideration, which a lot of people have these days, are the mobile phone. Everybody has a phone, and everybody is glued to it as they are walking across the street, and they're listening to music, or they've got headphones in and they don't see what's going on, and whack, all of a sudden they're hit by a car. And for those individuals, that's where the generational thing has happened. It's changed. People don't care because they're too busy doing other stuff. And I've seen the comparison between people being knocked down on film and television and people being knocked down for real. Many, many years ago, in my previous life, I was a store detective, one of many that used to operate around Leicester. And we'd be what we're talking. We're probably talking over the late 80s, yeah, something like that. I came out of. I used to work for Lewis's, a department store, and we followed a guy out, and he clocked us, and he started to run, and a couple of the local police were with us as well, a couple of uniformed police officers. And the streets, it's a little different now, but you could run up one alleyway into the back of a chain called British Home Stores, which is no longer with us. You used to run into there, and then you would come out onto Halford Street, I think is the street. And I think the plan was to run down there into the car park at the bottom, which presumably is where there was a vehicle waiting for him, I guess. And he hadn't got one item, he got a big bag of stuff, right? So anyway, he ran out, and I managed to just grab the bag as he was going, and a taxi came down the street and threw him into the air. And he went up in the air, and it's like he stayed up in the air, and I didn't see him come down for ages. And then I heard a thud when he did come down, and the guy, well, I mean, he certainly wasn't in a very good way, and I would suspect, he later died in hospital, but I would suspect that the injuries sustained from the impact, firstly with the vehicle and secondly with the floor, I think his head was possibly the thing that hit the floor first when he came back down again, was subsequently the reason for his death. And of course the fact that he was preoccupied trying to evade capture, disappeared through the door, didn't look right. It was a one-way street, didn't look right. He just was going in that direction, and this taxi hit him, and up he went. So I had a bag of goods in my hand, and I had cuts and grazes up one hand, dragged along the floor for a period of time. So I've seen it up close, and I know how awful it can be up close. I also know how very different it can be to that stuff you've seen on film and television. It's staged very obviously for a reason. It is staged to make it look dangerous. It's dangerous, don't get me wrong, but you do take certain situations for granted. And in order to make it look more exciting, the editor works his magic on different angles if it's available to be shot from a number of angles. And also you're in a position where, you might get to do a couple of takes. And the first part of that is the first take. And it was better on the second take when you went over the roof like that. That was nice. And then the landing, well, that was take 3. And that was much better, bouncing off the back of the car. And we've got a camera at the back which caught the whole thing. So you get an opportunity to do all of that, which you don't get in life. So that's important to bear in mind. Timing, preparation of the vehicle, padding, working with the stunt driver. Where does the character you're doubling need to be? What needs to happen during that sequence? And the natural bias. And should you find yourself in a situation where you are in real life in oncoming traffic, then listen to the words that Tammy has explained in that video. Nowadays, they're doing stuff with wires. Because there used to be 2 means of getting a car knockdown done: timing and a trampoline or a trampette. The trampette was really a case of either doing the first part of the knockdown, i.e. getting up onto the bonnet, and then a second shot where you would time it bounce up on the trampoline and onto the roof of the car, bouncing off it. Or, maybe doing the trampette and landing on it and going up over the top. There's a couple of ways of being able to do that. So they were the two ways of doing it. Then wire work came along, and what wire work has allowed it to happen? What wire work has done has given a bit more creative flavour to the knockdown. For me, maybe it just takes... There's a couple of examples here of wire work knockdowns, and personally I think it's unrealistic because the body doesn't move that way, and I appreciate that maybe the scenario of the situation, the scenario of the knockdown, means that it needs to be done this way or that way, but a body maybe wouldn't react. I don't believe a body would react that way. You're not going to get that, that additional spin through the air, but you are if you're on a ratchet, like we've discussed before, and it's a nitrogen pull, or it's something of that nature which flips the body quite vigorously in the air, and then the landing on the floor afterwards. So the knockdown itself is made to look much hairier than maybe it originally should be. So there are examples of all of those. My favourites are very clearly the natural ones, and being able to go through a lot of bits and pieces along the way. And there's some beauties that we've looked at, and to see what else goes on. But I think that's it's quite an extensive topic, and you could talk. Well, I could talk about it forever, because there's so many different aspects of it, and it's no longer just a case of simply watching somebody being knocked down. Because I'm trying to put myself in the position of the performer, of the driver, of the cameraman, of the stunt engineer. You do all of that, and the editor particularly. And once I've got all of that going on inside my head, it's really tricky. As many people who will vouch for this, who have sat down and watched movies with me in cinema, maybe on the first or second occasion, I'm a little edgy. If I see it again, or I'm watching it at home or something, well, I'm making notes throughout the whole thing, and I'm rewinding stuff, and I want to have a look at this again because I'm not so sure about X and Y and Z. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration, and you go over it in your head, which is presumably what a lot of performers will do. I know. In fact, I know they do. I've had that conversation with them where they go, "Oh, did you see this? Wasn't that great?" Or I'd have done it this way, or I'd have just done that. There's always thinking ahead, always thinking I might have just put my own little twist on it. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's a case of looking at all of these bits and pieces. And I hope, I have had so many comments in relation to the stuff we've done so far, where people go, "I didn't know that. I genuinely didn't know that. That's really interesting. Thank you for doing that." And if that's the case, then, my work here is done. I'm very happy that you're now in a position to maybe look at this in a different light and understand that the work that the professionals, the stunt professionals, do is an art form. It's absolutely essential to the everyday work of filmmakers and television makers, making TV drama, making comedy, making big budget pictures, making music video, whatever it is. There is a massive responsibility that stunt performers do on a regular basis. They are responsible for key elements in these pieces of art. And the action itself is an art form. And so if you are like many of the other people who have contacted me and said, "Look, I learned something new today and I really enjoyed that, and I will look at that sequence again, or I will look at a different sequence and I will look at it with fresh eyes," then that's about as good as it gets. That's all I ask you to do, is to look at it with, look at it from a different point of view, from a different standpoint. Look at it, and look at it as an art form, as a piece of artwork and go, yeah, I appreciate that, and I also appreciate the fact that that's taken a huge amount of time to get right. Not just been, a one-take wonder. And, stunt people are savvy like everything else. They are aware of the fact that they will get paid a fee to be on the picture for that day, okay? But they also realise that doing that stunt, they get paid a fee. That's a separate fee. And if they do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again, they will be paid an additional fee for each of those attempts. So, they're not daft as far as that's concerned, but that's not the main motivation. The main motivation, we'll talk about motivations in a later episode, but the main motivation here is getting that shot done properly, making it the best, doing the best to the best of your ability. Allowing the director and the editor to go, well, we've got plenty to choose from here. Let's use some of this. That was nice. This is great too, when you put it all together and you come up with a final sequence. And so we'll touch on other aspects as we go along. We've got lots of stuff to do. There's a whole bunch of bits and pieces coming. So keep tuned to the same channel. Thank you once again for all of your comments and various other bits and pieces that you send me. Any questions you have, please direct them to the YouTube channel or any of the social medias. You'll find Behind the Stunts on all of them. So look me up, give me a shout, and I will answer anything to the best of my knowledge, or indeed direct any questions elsewhere if it needs to be answered elsewhere. And again, massive thanks to those lovely people from the Pod Dojo Network who do all the bits and pieces as far as hosting the podcast and being part of a family, which is what we are. Go and check out the Pod Dojo Network wherever you find your podcasts. Find this podcast, for instance, and go and check it out with them. And we will rejoin and regroup next week for more of the same. Until then, bye for now.